All right, so this is our first notes on quadratic word problems. So I believe these notes are called Quadratic Word Problems 1, and these are notes. And the first thing we want to do is solve for x. So we want to think about how we would solve this for x. The problem is that this is not set equal to 0, and it already has some parentheses in it. So what we need to do is we need to expand it. Okay. In other words, the first thing we want to do is we want to expand. Then we want to set the right side equal to 0. Set the right side equal to 0. And then we want to factor and solve. Factor and solve. Now your skill set should really be at all of these things. You know how to do all of these things, but you've never really done them all together. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start by expanding, which means I'm going to distribute this to get x squared minus 9x equals 22. Okay. Now we want to set the right side equal to 0. Does somebody want to chime in and tell me what I could do to set the right side to 0? What would I do to set the right side to 0? Perfect. So we'll subtract 22 from both sides. So I'm going to put a check here. I'm going to subtract 22. I'm color coding. That can't combine, so I now have x squared plus 9x minus 22 is equal to 0. So that's really where I'm at now. And now I'm on to the last step, which is to factor and solve that. Now, I think we should feel comfortable factoring this. So if somebody could tell me what this factors into, that would be much appreciated. Brev? Perfect. So x plus 11 and x minus 2. Are there any questions on that so far? All right. So now what we need to do is solve that. So I also wrote solve. So that means that x is equal to and x is equal to. Can somebody tell me what the two answers are for x? X is equal to, what's that? Actually, x is equal to negative 11 and positive 2. And here's the reason. You got to take these factors and you got to set them equal to 0. X plus 11 equals 0. So x equals negative 11. X plus 2 equals, or sorry, x minus 2 equals 0. So x equals positive 2, right? And those are our answers. So that's how we solve a problem like that. Is that okay? Let's see if we can go through the next problem and go through the steps again. So what does step 1 say to do? Step 1 says to expand. So what do I mean by expand? Anybody? What do I mean by expand? Let me get this out of your way so you can just focus. Go ahead, shout it out if you know it. Distribute, yeah, perfect. So we're going to start by expanding. You're going to use distributive property. So I'm going to use the blue marker to expand like so. 6x squared. Somebody shout out the next one. 6x squared plus 12x. Thank you. Next one. 8x plus 16 equals 16. So that's all expanded. I'm going to actually combine similar terms and set the other side to 0, which is in green. So I'm going to minus the 16 on both sides, giving me just 0 here. I'm going to have 20x. I'm going to have 6x squared plus 20x. Okay? Are there questions there? Nothing really crazy going on here that you haven't done before, right? Am I right or am I right? Yeah? Okay, now we need to factor it because it says in the step 3 that we need to factor it and solve it. So how are we going to factor this? What are we going to take out for this guy? Anybody? Is there a greatest common factor? Is there a greatest common factor? Okay, so it's looking like we could take out 2 and x from this. So we take out 2x, and we have 3x plus 10 is equal to 0. We now have to do the last step, which is to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. I'm going to try to just highlight this in purple so that we can understand that this is a factor and this is a factor. So both of these have to come over here. And Matt, if you could remind us what we need to do because of that last thing we were talking about. What are we going to do with those? Set them to what? Well, we've already factored them. Remember what we did up top over here? We have to set them equal to something. What do we have to set them equal to, people? 0. Good. So we're going to set the first one, which is 2x equal to 0. And we're going to set the second one, which is 3x plus 10 equal to 0. Okay? What does this come out to for an answer? 2x equals 0 is going to come out as x equals 0, right? Because you divide 0 by 2, right? And then 3x plus 10, how do we solve that equation? Think about how to solve that equation. Can I get an answer? Caden? Subtract the 10. 3x equals negative 10. So x equals negative 10 over 3. Okay? That's where we're at. 3 and 4 are actually surprisingly some of the easier problems. I just wanted to make sure you had a good grasp on 1 and 2. So 3 and 4 are going to be some now you tries for everybody watching the video. So pause the video and give 3 and 4 a shot. Okay? These are your now you try. So pause the video and see what you can do with that. So remember, pause the video and try 3 and 4, but what I want to just bring your attention to is that on numbers 1 and 2, you had things that were broken down like already into factors, and they needed to be distributed out. They needed to be expanded, which is step 1. But on numbers 3 and 4, you don't need to expand. Step 1 is already done for those two problems, number 3 and 4, right? So on numbers 3 and 4, you then need to go to step 2, which is to set it to 0. Well, do you need to do any setting to 0 on numbers 3 and 4, or are they already set to 0? They're already set to 0. So really on 3 and 4, all you're doing is factoring, which is a skill you have to have, and then you're setting the factors to 0 and finding the answers for x, the x values, all right? So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's continue on to the next page, and now we're going to talk about quadratic word problems. Motion. So the first thought that I have is, does anyone know what velocity is? What is velocity? Do you have a general idea of what velocity is? So let's have that discussion. Okay, so what I got for velocity is this. It's like speed, which is kind of true. The thing that is interesting about velocity is that velocity is speed with a direction. So velocity is speed of something with a direction. And what I want to say about direction is, positive velocity would mean it's going up, and negative velocity would mean it's going down. And that's pretty much for our course all we're going to deal with. If your velocity is positive, your object is traveling which direction? Up. If your velocity is negative, your object is traveling down. And for this course, that's all you need to know. There are other courses where velocity could be going diagonal or side to side, or it could even be going in 3 dimensions. But for our intents and purposes, for our course, it's only freshman algebra here, velocity is positive. That means the object is moving up with some speed. The velocity is negative. The object is moving down with some speed. Velocity is interesting. It's different than speed, okay? Velocity says if I get on the Mass Pike and I drive 50 miles an hour for an hour, where will I be? 50 miles per hour for an hour. Where will I be? Will I be in Boston? 50 miles away? All right. Well, if I drive 50 miles an hour on the Mass Pike east, I'll probably be in Boston. And if I drive 50 miles on the Mass Pike west, I'll probably be in Springfield, right? And is there a difference between the two? Even though I'm going the same speed, there's a big difference between going east and west, right? It matters. Okay, so sometimes speed is not enough. You need to know what direction it's going, up or down, left or right, east or west. Also, sometimes direction doesn't matter to you at all. Because sometimes direction just doesn't matter, okay? Imagine you are leaving school today, okay? And you're walking, you're trying to cross the street, and you get hit by a Volkswagen Beetle, okay? A punch buggy, if you will. At about 10 miles an hour, so you're not too injured. Maybe it breaks your hip or something. That's going to hurt, yeah? Yeah, it's going to hurt. Imagine that same exact Volkswagen Beetle, keep in mind the symmetry of the car, hits you in reverse at 10 miles an hour. How's that going to feel? Is it going to feel the same or different? But the punch buggy is shaped like so. Right? It's the same on the front and the back. So it doesn't really matter whether this car hits you in forwards or in reverse. It's still going to cause a lot of pain, right? It doesn't matter at all. That's when speed is the only thing that matters. Velocity is speed with a direction. We're going to now talk about this little equation here. So please write down the following. This equation right here. I want to label all of these things. So that h is going to stand for final height. Okay? That is your final height. You've got to write this down. This is very important. Okay. The t that goes here and even here, right? And I think I might put those on the top just for the sake of having that there. The t that goes there and there is time. Okay. And actually, I want to change that color, just for your purposes, to a different color. There we go. Time. The S here, the S is the starting point. Starting point, or place, if you like. Starting point or starting place. Okay? And lastly, what do you think the V stands for? Velocity. And it's also the starting velocity, okay? Because the velocity will change if you drop a penny, it gets faster and faster as it falls, okay? So these are all the variables in this equation. Good news is, you see how there's 4 different colors for all the variables? Yes? I'm probably going to give you, in the word problem, 3 of those, okay? So you'll get 3 of those in the word problem, or you'll be able to figure 3 of those out from the word problem. Hopefully that helps. So we're going to go through one more example. This video might be on the longer side for that reason, but let's just try it. So here's the problem. And I'm going to move a little bit quicker here just because I don't want to keep the video too long. When the diver jumps from a ledge, okay, his vertical motion can be modeled by this blue equation here. That's the vertical motion model. Suppose the ledge is 48 feet above the ocean. So what do you think that 48 feet represents? 48 feet above the ocean. Does that represent the height, the final height, the starting point, the velocity, or the time? Starting point. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and write s equals 48 over here. S equals 48. That's the starting point of the jump. His initial upward velocity, I mean, they're using the word velocity. Velocity is 8. So I'm going to put v equals 8 here. Okay? He's jumping up, so his velocity is positive 8. And it wants to know how long until the diver hits the water. So when he enters the water. So how high up is the water is my question. How high up is the water? 0? 0? The water is at a height of 0. So what do you think the final height is when he hits the water? 0. So the final height is going to equal 0. These 3 variables must be plugged in. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to replace this with 0. I'm going to leave everything else alone. So this is going to equal negative 16 t squared plus, I'm going to put the 8 there now. There's the 8. and then I'm going to put the 48 right here. Are there any questions about the setup? No? Now you had to use your brain, you had to use your mind, the power of your own mind, to figure out what was what. The starting point, the final height, and the velocity. But now that you've plugged them in, you should say, hey, I think I actually feel like this is a pretty familiar equation right here. So I'm gonna forget about the word problem for a second. I'm gonna turn it into a regular old worksheet problem. Okay? Now the question becomes this. Is the left side set equal to 0? Is the left side set equal to 0? Yes or no? Yeah. So if the left side is set equal to 0, we can now just go through our steps. And our steps are as follows, okay? The steps are as followed. We need the right side to equal 0. We need to factor the left side. We need to set the factors equal to 0, and we need to solve. So let's go through that step by step here. How are we doing on time? Not great. So the right side is equal to 0. We need to factor the left side. I'm going to take this as a review and go through it quick. Let's say that -8 comes out of each, which it does. Then we'll have 2t squared minus t, minus 1t, if you will, minus 6 is equal to 0. That's step 2. And we have to continue factoring. We're not done yet. But what I like to do is here, I like to clean up this by dividing -8 on both sides. If you divide -8 on both sides, this is going to still equal 0. 0 divided by -8. And now you can just factor this thing into 2 parentheses. Hopefully that goes okay. So we're going to need 2t and t, right? We've got to assume this is a review, that this is smooth. It might not be, but we've got to get to that point. 3 here and 2 here, I just happen to know. And this is how it factors, okay? So that's the factoring. Now we have to set those factors to 0. So that's this part. You got to take this factor, 2t plus 3, and make it equal 0. You got to take this factor, t minus 2, and make it equal 0. And then you need to solve those factors. So that means that t in this case is -3/2. Trust me, you'll get that if you solve it. And t in this case is 2. Do you think it took the diver -3/2 of a second or 2 seconds to hit the water? 2 seconds. The -3/2 is actually what's called an extraneous solution. Negative time doesn't make a lot of sense in this problem because we want to know what he hits the water after he jumps. So we toss it and we say that it took him 2 seconds. And this is actually true. If you actually jump off a 48-foot cliff, I don't recommend it, with an upward velocity of 8, you will actually hit the water after 2 seconds. We're going to have to conclude the video there. Thanks for watching. We will see you soon.